the Dean's single 3031 class, or Achilles Class, was a type of steam locomotive built by the British Great Western Railway between 1891 and 1899. They were designed by William Dean for passenger work. The first 30 members of the class were built as 2s of the 3001 class. The first 8 members of the class were built as convertible 7 feet 1/4 in broad gauge 2 locomotives, being converted to standard gauge in mid-1892, at the end of broad gauge running on the Great Western Railway. A further 22 were built in late 1891 and early 1892, this time as standard gauge engines, although the 4 feet 8½ in 3001 class were fitted with larger boilers than earlier GWR 2 classes. The diameter of the boiler was constrained by its position between the 7 feet 8½ in driving wheels. Thus, boiler capacity could only be increased by making the boiler longer, not wider, bringing the smoke box and cylinders in front of the leading axle. The extra weight of the larger boilers was borne by the leading wheels, making the locomotives unstable, particularly at speed. On the 16th of September 1893, No. 3021 Wigmore Castle, hauling an express train, was derailed in Box Tunnel when the front axle broke. The cause of the accident was thought to be excessive weight being carried on the front axle, so it was decided to replace the leading pair of wheels in the 3001 class with a bogie. In the 3001 class, the steam chest was located underneath the cylinders and contained 2 slide valves. The inverted placement of the valves allowed them to drop away from the face of the steam ports when steam was shut off, thus reducing wear. The steam chest and valves lay above the front carrying axle, and there was sufficient clearance to allow the steam chest cover to be removed over the axle for maintenance. Replacing the axle with a bogie of conventional design would have obstructed access to the port faces. Dean instead used a suspension bogie, in which the weight of the locomotive was transferred upwards to the bogie by 4 bolts mounted on the inside frames. The center pin of the bogie rotated in a spring-centered block mounted beneath the steam chest on cross beams. This setup gave sufficient clearance so that, when the bolts were undone, the front end of the locomotive raised, and a bogie was run out from underneath. The steam chest cover could be removed without hindrance. Number 3021 was rebuilt as a 4-2 in March 1894. Between June and December 1894, 28 remaining locomotives of the 3001 class were rebuilt. The first of a further 50 new bogie singles was also built in March 1894, the last of the class being outshopped in March 1899. These new locomotives differed from the rebuilds in having the cylinder diameter reduced from 20 to 19 inches, and the springs for the trailing wheels located above the footplate and outside the cab, necessitating a reduced width from the latter. The rebuilds subsequently had their cylinders lined down to 19 inches. The entire class, as they required it, had the driving wheels fitted with thicker tires from 1898 onwards, increasing the wheel diameter by 0.5 inch to 7 feet 8½ in. In 1900, George Jackson Churchwood replaced the boiler on number 3027 Worcester with a parallel standard 2 boiler. 12 further engines were similarly converted in 1905 and 1906. Despite the locomotive's speed, the 4-2 design was soon found to be outdated and unsuitable for more modern operation. A proposal to improve the performance by by fitting them with long travel valves, was found to be impracticable. The existing valves were directly driven from eccentrics mounted on the driving axle, and there was insufficient clearance to fit larger eccentrics. Churchward considered rebuilding the class as Armstrong Class 4 OS with 7 feet 2 in coupled wheels. The cylinder center line would then be 3.5 in above the driving center, due to the 7 in difference in driving wheel diameter. This scheme was not carried through because the connecting rods would not clear the lower slide bar, and the valve gear would be out of alignment. An alternative proposal to drop the locomotive 3.5 in and raise the buffer beam and drag box was also rejected on the grounds of cost. The class were gradually withdrawn between 1908 and 1915, with the last survivor, No. 3074 Princess Helena, being withdrawn in December 1916. Notable members of the class: 3065 Duke of Connaught made a record-breaking run with the Ocean Mail on the 9th of May 1904, covering the distance from Bristol to Paddington in 99 minutes 46 seconds as part of a run from Plymouth to Paddington in 227 minutes. 3041 The Queen, originally named James Mason, was an example of this class allocated to royal train duties. Number 3046 Lord of the Isles has enjoyed a certain amount of celebrity, having been chosen as the prototype for a triang model locomotive. Since then the engine has also been modeled by Brio and Matchbox. In 2006, Hornby also produced a limited edition of the same model, this time bearing the name Lorna Doone. Replica. None of the original class survive, but a static replica of the Queen was commissioned by Two Swords for the Railways and Royalty exhibition at Windsor and Eton Central Railway Station. The replica loco was completed in December 1982 and displayed outside Steamtown in January 1983, before being transported by road to Windsor on the 12th of January 1983 and arriving on the 14th of January. The main frames, footplate, boiler, smokebox, cabin splashes were fabricated by Babcocks of Tipton. The tender was modified from an LBS CRC2 extender. Parts from a GWR tender that came from the Dumbleton Hall Preservation Society were used to provide the wheels for the front bogie and the rear wheels. The top halves of the driving wheels do not exist, and were cast from 2 quarters being bolted together to make a half, and the driving wheels also don't sit on the rail, so the loco could be wheeled into position on its front bogie and rear wheels. Some boiler fittings were obtained from the Great Western Society and sandblasted, and the dome and safety valve bonnet were made by Newcastle Metal Spinners. Two Swords fitted smoke and steam generators, so steam was emitted from the cab, whistles, safety valves and smoke from the chimney. A sound unit was also fitted. The engine remains there, but the tender was scrapped to make more space for the shopping centre occupying the station building. The Bluebell Railway Atlantic Group purchased the axle boxes, springs and the complete wheel sets from the tender for use in the new Build Atlantic project. Numbering. Models. Hornby Railways manufacture a model of the 3031 class in lower gauge. Civic heraldry. The coat of arms of the old borough of Swindon includes an image of 3029 White Horse on the shield. The coat of arms was displayed on the splashes of the last Castle class built. Steam Museum of the Great Western Railway at Swindon acquired one of the splashes in 2012.